My name is Sierra Donnelly. I'm 34, and I learned my father died from a newspaper. Not a phone call, not even a message, just a headline on page 3 of the Boston Globe while waiting for coffee. Franklin Donnelly, real estate mogul, dies at 63. I stared at the grainy photo from a charity gala I hadn't been invited to. Again. 6 years of silence, erased with a single caption. They didn't even include my name in the obituary. Just, survived by his children, Brent and Taylor. But I am still his daughter, and they don't get to rewrite that. So I put on the only black dress I owned, and I showed up, uninvited, to my own father's funeral. They weren't expecting me. They weren't ready for what he left behind. And they had no idea the truth was about to play. On screen, in his voice, in front of everyone. Before I show you how a forgotten daughter became the one who inherited it all, tell me where you're watching from. If you've ever been erased by your own family, this story is for you. Hit that like button. Subscribe. Because today, we unbury the truth. The headline had appeared like a slap across the face. Franklin Donnelly, real estate mogul, dies at 63. I hadn't been looking for it. I'd only opened the Boston Globe out of habit while waiting for my coffee. And there it was. My father's obituary laid out beneath a grainy photograph from a charity gala I hadn't been invited to either. 6 years of silence. 6 years of distance so deliberate it had begun to feel permanent. I'd told myself that if I ever saw my family's names again, it would be because I searched for them. But this was different. This found me. And for all the pain I thought I'd left behind, it surged up again with the force of a flood. I stared at the article until the words blurred. There was a short paragraph about his surviving children. Brent and Taylor. My name wasn't there. My name wasn't anywhere. And yet, I was still his daughter. I shouldn't have gone. I knew that. But something inside me, something stubborn, cracked, angry, refused to let them erase me so easily. If they could look me in the eyes and tell me I wasn't part of the family anymore, fine. But they weren't going to do it behind my back. On the morning of April 8th, I put on the only black dress I had, scraped my hair back into a knot, and walked into St. James Church like a woman crashing a stranger's funeral. It was cold inside. Cold in the way only an old New England church can be. High ceilings, stone walls, and a kind of silence that presses on your skin like frost. People turned as I walked in. Not everyone, just the ones who recognized me. Faces I hadn't seen in years blinked at me, some surprised, some disapproving. A few shifted in their pews, as if unsure whether I'd sit down or set fire to the altar. My mother didn't look at me. She was seated in the front pew, clad in an immaculate black coat with a matching hat that shadowed her face. But even from the back of the church, I could feel her rigidity, like the presence of a statue carved from judgment and pride. Brent stood beside her, tall and stiff, his profile sharp as ever. When he glanced over his shoulder and saw me, there was no flicker of recognition, just a tightening around his eyes, the kind he'd always had when something didn't go according to plan. I started to move down the aisle, unsure where to sit. I wasn't there to cause a scene. I wasn't going to push my way to the front. But I thought, maybe I could stand quietly near the casket. Just for a moment. Just to say goodbye. "Miss, can I help you?" A man in a gray suit, one of Brent's assistants, I guessed, stepped into my path with a polite but firm smile. "I'm Franklin Donnelly's daughter," I said, my voice steady. "I don't need help." He didn't move. I was told only immediate family is allowed up front. I let the words sit there, let them bloom into irony. "Tell Brent that his sister is here," I said. "Or don't. I'm not asking permission." Still, I turned and took a seat in the last pew. Alone. The service began. The priest spoke of legacy, of business accomplishments, of a man with unshakable discipline and vision. No one mentioned his children. No one mentioned me. I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't sad. I was. But it was a sadness I'd worn for so long that it had become quiet. Familiar. Like an old scar you forget is there until someone touches it. Taylor was the only one who looked at me. Just once. Her expression was blank, unreadable. She didn't wave, didn't smile. But her eyes lingered a second longer than they had to. When it was over, people filed past the casket. I stayed seated, waiting until the line thinned. Then I stood, approached the aisle, and paused halfway down. "Wait," a voice barked behind me. I turned. Brent. He was coming toward me, fast. His suit crisp, his shoes silent on the stone floor. Up close, I could see the anger in his face. The kind that simmered just under the surface. Polished, controlled, but boiling all the same. "You shouldn't be here," he said, voice low. "I'm not here for you." "You weren't invited, Sierra." I looked him in the eye. "Did he ask you to make the guest list? Or did you take that upon yourself too?" His mouth twitched. "He would have never wanted you here," Brent said coldly as I walked out of the church. Even among strangers, I could have felt safer. But these were my blood, looking through me like glass. The Boston Grand Hall hadn't changed. It was still towering, gilded, too opulent for grief. My father loved throwing events here. Fundraisers, charity galas, holiday parties. He loved the way money echoed in marble. I remembered standing near the coat room when I was 15, listening to Brent brag to a hedge fund manager about our family's empire, as if I were just the help handing out drinks. Now, 18 years later, I stood at the entrance watching clusters of guests sip champagne beneath the chandelier he'd had shipped from Vienna. The whole room shimmered with curated sorrow. But no one looked like they'd lost a father. No one looked like they remembered I was his daughter. I didn't belong here, but I came anyway. Not for them, but because I needed to be where he had once stood, where I might still feel something like closure. A server offered me a drink and hesitated when our eyes met, as if unsure whether I was a guest or an intrusion. I took the glass anyway. It trembled just slightly in my hand. I spotted Brent near the piano, flanked by two colleagues in sleek navy suits. His expression relaxed. Too relaxed. And then, without even trying to lower his voice, he chuckled. "She's here for the will, obviously." Laughter followed like a cue. Not everyone laughed, but no one objected. I sipped my drink and turned away, pretending the champagne didn't burn. I walked toward the buffet, but before I could reach for a plate, a young waiter leaned toward me and murmured, "Excuse me, Ms. Donnelly. The family table is reserved." My name on his lips felt both alien and insulting. "I see," I said, setting the glass down too gently to show the crack forming inside me. So I found a corner seat near the back, away from the spotlight beside a fake potted tree. From there, I watched them. Brent playing host, Taylor lingering at the edge of things, her posture guarded, her laughter half-hearted. I could have left. I should have. But something in me refused to. If they wanted me gone, they would have to drag me. My phone buzzed in my clutch. Rachel Kim. Heard Brent embezzled from the company. Call me. I stared at the message, rereading it 3 times before locking the screen. Of course he did. Of course that would explain the sudden family rebranding, the silence around the estate. I tucked the thought away for later. The reception began to thin. A few of the guests gave me passing glances on their way out. Some polite, others curt. No one stopped to say hello. I was still invisible. But not to everyone. "Ms. Donnelly?" I turned to find Gerald Wolfe, my father's longtime attorney, standing just behind me. He was older than I remembered, his face softer but eyes still sharp beneath square glasses. He bowed his head lightly. "Gerald," I said, surprised. "You remember me?" "Of course I do. Your father spoke of you more than you might believe." I blinked. "I doubt that." He smiled faintly. "You'd be surprised." I waited. He didn't sit, just stood like he wasn't planning to stay long. Then he said, There's an important matter I'd like to discuss. Something your father left behind. My mouth dried. A letter? A video, actually, he replied. A message, one he wanted you to hear. I stared at him. Just me? Originally, yes. He looked over his shoulder toward the remaining guests. Brent and Taylor were talking near the far exit, heads bowed. Brent threw his head back in a laugh I didn't believe. Taylor didn't quite smile. But, Wolf continued, I suggest we play it for everyone. Why? Because it changes things. He didn't elaborate. He handed me a small business card with his address and time. Tomorrow morning, 9:30 a.m. His fingers brushed mine. Prepare yourself, Ms. Donnelly. Your father's truth was not one he expected to be buried with him. He nodded once, then turned and disappeared into the thinning crowd. I sat for another few minutes, the card pressed between my fingers like a verdict. I looked up one last time, and there they were. Brent standing beside Taylor, his hand on her shoulder. She wasn't laughing exactly, but her mouth was open, caught mid-reaction to whatever he'd said. Brent was smiling too wide. Too easy. They looked like victors, but they had no idea what tomorrow would bring. I see Brent standing next to Taylor, both of them laughing. I know, tomorrow morning, everything will change. If they buried him hoping to bury the truth too, they forgot one thing. He left a voice behind. The conference room was too bright. Sunlight streamed through the tall glass windows of Wolf Law Office, gleaming against the silver fixtures and polished floor. It had always amazed me how grief, when surrounded by marble and brass, felt like a performance rather than pain. Wolf had arranged the chairs in a crescent shape around a large screen. I was the first to arrive, by choice. I needed a moment alone before facing them all, before hearing him. Wolf didn't say much when he entered, just a calm nod and a murmured, "It's ready." Then they came. Brent burst in like he owned the place, wearing a sharp charcoal suit and an even sharper scowl. Our mother followed behind, her heels tapping with restrained fury. Taylor, always the ghost between us, slipped in with her shoulders drawn as if trying to disappear. Two of my father's closest executives, Mr. Linden and Miss Park, filed in last. They took seats opposite me, flanking Brent, who didn't bother hiding his glare. Wolf stood near the screen. "Before we begin," he said, "please remember this was your father's final message. It will not be interrupted." Brent snorted. "As long as it's short." Wolf ignored him and pressed play. The screen lit up with my father's face. He looked older than I remembered. His silver hair unkempt, tie loosened, voice a little hoarse. But his eyes, they were sharp and unmistakably clear. "If you're seeing this," he began, "I'm gone. And if you're all in that room, it means I've asked Gerald to make sure my words are heard. Not just read." No one moved. Even Brent stopped tapping his foot. He continued. "Sierra," he said, looking straight into the lens. "You're probably wondering why I cut you off all those years ago. It wasn't about your choices. It was about my pride. You refused to follow the blueprint I laid out for you. You wanted something different. And I couldn't handle that." He paused, his throat tightening. "But you were right to walk away." I felt something lurch inside me. It was strange. Validation arriving in the voice of the very man who once made me feel like a disgrace. To Brent, my father went on, his voice hardening. "I trusted you to protect the company, to lead with integrity. Instead, I've seen expenses funneled into private accounts, money disappearing into consulting fees that don't exist." Brent's face flushed. "That's a damn lie." Wolf raised a hand. "Interrupt again, and I'll have you escorted out." The screen kept playing. My shares, my control of Donnelly Capital, my legacy, I leave them to Sierra. Not because she's the eldest, but because she's the only one who had the courage to challenge me. She's the only one with principles. She earned this even when I didn't deserve her. The room was still. The air had thickened. Brent leapt to his feet. You can't be serious. She was nothing but a dropout with paint on her jeans. She's not a CEO. She's a damn art teacher. Sit down, our mother snapped. It was the first thing she'd said since entering the room. Brent turned to her, eyes wide, betrayed. Wolf stepped forward, a thick envelope in his hand. These are the signed, notarized documents. Sierra Donnelly is the sole legal heir to Franklin Donnelly's estate and holding company. Brent lunged. He didn't reach me. Wolf moved like steel, stepping between us with surprising force. You're done, he said, his voice low, calm, final. Legally and morally. Brent froze, chest heaving, fists trembling. His eyes were glassy, not with sorrow, but humiliation. He didn't even look at me. He stared at Wolf like he wanted to break something. No one moved to defend him. Not Taylor, who now had tears streaking her cheeks. Not our mother, who looked as though someone had carved out her breath. I picked up the envelope Wolf extended toward me. It was heavier than I expected. I stood, adjusted my coat, and turned for the door. No one said a word. The silence behind me wasn't peaceful. It was stunned, wounded, raw. I leave the office, Brent's eyes are blazing, but behind me, the silence of the whole family. They didn't expect me to rise. Now they scrambled to discredit me. The elevator doors slid open with a soft hiss, revealing the newly remodeled 17th floor, the executive wing of Donnelly Group headquarters. It looked no different than when I last stepped through here 6 years ago. Sleek, metallic, sterile. But this time, the receptionist didn't ignore me. This time, the staff stood when I passed. And this time, it was my name on the official letterhead behind the podium. The press room had been hastily prepped for what Wolf called a controlled response. I called it something else. My reckoning. A dozen reporters sat with recorders poised, their eyes flicking from their notepads to the door I'd soon walk through. I inhaled slowly, feeling my ribs tighten beneath the tailored blazer Rachel had insisted I wear. Wolf leaned in before I stepped out. Remember, you don't owe them answers. You offer clarity. I nodded. Then I walked into the blaze. Cameras flashed, shutters clicked. The low murmur of voices dissolved into silence as I stood behind the mic. I was forgotten, I began, steady and clear, but I never forgot my name. There was a beat, a pause long enough for the words to land. Then the air buzzed with shifting postures and scribbling pens. I continued. For years, I pursued a life outside this boardroom, not because I lacked ambition, but because I refused to mirror the ambition that rotted this family from the inside. My father and I did not see eye to eye, but in the end, he recognized that the values he once dismissed were the ones worth preserving. I caught sight of Wolf in the corner, arms crossed, his face unreadable but still. Questions came after, loud, sharp, some veiled, others blunt. Is it true Brent Donnelly called you unqualified to lead? Why do you think your father excluded his son from the will? Are you prepared to run a billion-dollar company with no formal experience? I answered what mattered. I deflected what didn't. I never lost my tone. Then came the headline moment. One reporter held up a tablet. Dropout with paint on her jeans. Brent Donnelly's words go viral. Any comment? I smiled. You can paint in jeans. You can also rebuild an empire in them. The crowd reacted. Some chuckled, others nodded. But I didn't stay long. I thanked them, exited the stage, and let Wolf handle the aftershock. Back in the hall, Vivian Lau was waiting. She'd been HR director since my early 20s. Sharp bob haircut, navy dress, a clipboard tucked neatly against her side. I remembered her faintly. Kind, firm, but never loud. I liked what you said, she said without preamble. But more importantly, I liked how you said it. Thanks, I said, exhaling, unsure what this was. She leaned in. I have something Brent made me sign 2 years ago. It redirected unused human resources funds into a private bonus account. His. I still have the hard copy, if you want it. I blinked. Why now? Because I thought your father would fix it before he died, she said. And because I saw your face when you said you weren't afraid anymore. Wolf approached just as she handed me the folder. He scanned the document, his eyes narrowing. This is damning. And legal. We'll go public when you're ready, Vivian said, then added, I'll testify. He ruined more than one career. Before I could respond, Wolf's phone buzzed. He glanced down, frowned, and handed it to me. Email from Brent Donnelly. Subject confidential, Sierra's academic record. To whom it may concern, attached is evidence suggesting Sierra Donnelly plagiarized her senior thesis at NYU. Except the recipient wasn't Wolf. It wasn't legal. It was everyone at alldonnellystaff.com. Wolf pinched the bridge of his nose. He meant to send this to the board. Instead, he just broadcasted a baseless defamation claim to every employee in the company. I didn't flinch. Let him. I've got the original paper, published and peer-reviewed. I'll have Rachel dig it up. Wolf exhaled, then looked over his shoulder as his assistant entered, sliding a thin sheet across the glass table. He picked it up, scanned it, and handed it to me. Black letters, clean font, company seal. Internal audit summary. Unauthorized transactions. Brent Donnelly. Total sum flagged $2,378,000. The audit's in, Wolf said quietly. Brent's toast. There's a moment where fear leaves the room and fury takes its place. The conference room was soundproofed, but I swore I could still feel the static hum of tension in the walls. Donnelly Group had never held a meeting like this. Not one streamed live to every senior department head. Not one where the accused sat feet away from the evidence. I stood at the head of the table, flanked by Wolf and Vivian. The screen behind me displayed a timeline in crisp Helvetica. Unauthorized funds, shell account, Brent Donnelly. Across from me sat the board. Charles, Helen, Dominique, and others, their faces carved in composure but with eyes that flicked between Brent and the growing pile of damning data. Brent lounged with false calm, tie slightly loosened, eyes glinting like he was preparing for a duel he'd already won. I didn't waste time. Let's start with where the money went, I said, voice firm. Between September 2022 and December 2023, over $2.3 million was transferred from our HR and community wellness budgets into a shell company registered in Nevada. That company's sole beneficiary? I tapped the screen. A slide changed. B. Donnelly Holdings, Brent Donnelly, CEO. He scoffed. Creative. You've always been good at fiction. I prefer data, I replied, and so does the board. Vivian stepped forward, placing a small device on the table. This is a recording from a conversation in January, when Brent asked me to shift unspent HR funds into PR to, quote, make us look less heartless. He threatened my position when I hesitated. The recording played. Brent's voice, unmistakably smug, filled the room. Nobody reads HR breakdowns. Push it into PR. Throw in a diversity campaign or some sob story, I don't care. Just make me look like I give a damn. Silence. Then Helen blinked slowly, her pen frozen in midair. You forged that, Brent spat. She's making this up. Sierra always hated me. I hated what you stood for, I cut in, and what you did with our father's trust. Wolf reached into a folder, pulled out a signed audit report. This is from Harmon & Lowe, the firm your father used for 20 years. It verifies every transaction. Your signature is here on all 12 disbursement authorizations. Brent went pale. He grabbed the paper, skimmed it like a drowning man scanning for oxygen. This doesn't prove anything. This is a setup. You signed your own downfall, Charles said quietly. Wolf spoke next. According to Donnelly Group bylaws, any executive found to have misappropriated over $1 million is subject to immediate dismissal pending board vote. Helen looked at me. Are you requesting that vote now, Ms. Donnelly? I nodded once. Yes, effective immediately. The room changed. Tablets appeared. Styluses clicked. Votes were cast in silence. It was Dominique who read the tally. 12 in favor, 0 against. Brent Donnelly is removed from his position, effective today. For the first time, Brent didn't speak. His chair scraped back violently as he stood, jaw clenched, face burning. His eyes darted around, looking for someone, anyone to defend him. No one moved. Vivian crossed her arms. Wolf calmly returned the documents to his folder. I stayed standing. He turned to me as he neared the exit. You think this is over? You think this is over? Even after his death, my father had one more thing to say. The room was dim, paneled in walnut and shadow, with a single monitor set into the wall like a confession booth. Wolf closed the door behind us, his expression gentler than usual. Taylor sat beside me, nervous, silent, hands folded tight in her lap. It was the first time we had been alone together since the funeral. She didn't speak, but she didn't leave either. On the table sat a flash drive, a small, ordinary thing, but it felt heavier than everything we'd uncovered in the last 3 days. This is the sealed addendum, Wolf said. Your father recorded it on March 28th. He asked that it only be played if Brent contested the will, which, obviously. I nodded once. He inserted the drive and dimmed the lights. The screen blinked. Then, there he was. Franklin Donnelly, thinner than I remembered. Pale. But his eyes were still sharp, like flint just before the strike. If you're seeing this, he began, then things did not go as peacefully as I hoped. But perhaps they never would have. He paused. His breathing was shallow. I raised a son to be my shadow. But my daughter, she became her own sun. I felt Taylor stiffen beside me. I was proud of your ambition, Brent. But I was afraid of your hunger. I thought grooming you would carry the name forward. I thought denying Sierra would humble her. But I was wrong on both counts. I didn't realize I was holding my breath until I had to exhale quietly into my palm. Franklin looked down, his voice growing softer. Sierra, if you're listening, I'm sorry. I didn't know how to be a father to a woman who refused to be small. I was taught that men lead and women follow. You challenged that. And instead of learning, I punished you for it. He cleared his throat, wincing slightly. I didn't apologize when I should have. I didn't tell the world how you carried your values when the rest of us dropped ours. I was ashamed. Not of you, but of what I had become. A pause. His next words were slower, weighted. I didn't just leave you a company. I left you a challenge. Do not just lead Donnelly Group. Lead yourself out of our name's shadow. Beside me, Taylor's breath hitched. Then, in a broken whisper, he really did love you. On screen, Franklin leaned back, his eyes closing just for a second. You don't need my permission anymore. You never did. But I hope somehow you'll forgive me. The screen went black. No music, no logo, just silence. I sat there a moment, stunned. Not because of what he said, but because it was the first time in my life I heard my father speak like a man, not a title. Tears fell, fast and quiet. I didn't wipe them away. Taylor reached for my hand but didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. I rose slowly, thanking Wolf with a nod. The hallway outside was quiet, familiar. Then I saw it. The family photo. It hung crooked in its old brass frame. My father at the center, Mom at his side, Brent and Taylor smiling perfectly, and me, off to the edge as if I'd wandered into the shot by accident. Beneath the image was a note in my father's scrawl. The Donnellys, together always. I pulled a pen from my pocket. My fingers hovered. Then I crossed out one name. Brent. Underneath, I wrote something new. Time to rewrite the story. And this time, it would be mine. I didn't walk out of Wolf's office with triumph in my veins. Not really. I walked out with silence. A silence that pressed against my chest, heavier than any applause or gloating could ever be. For years, I had rehearsed this moment in my mind, what it would feel like to finally prove that I wasn't the failure, the disappointment, the outsider. But the truth is, when the moment came, all I felt was release. Not joy, not vengeance, just release. I used to dream about my father telling me he was proud. But what I got instead was something deeper. An acknowledgement that he had seen me, even when he pretended not to. Even when I was painting in my tiny apartment, eating leftovers and watching the world forget my name, he remembered. He just didn't have the strength to say it out loud while he was alive. And Brent? I didn't need to watch him fall. He was already collapsing under the weight of his own arrogance. Every lie he told came back wrapped in his own handwriting, sealed with his own signature. His downfall didn't need fireworks. It just needed daylight. Taylor hugged me for the first time in 6 years the night after we heard the final recording. She cried into my shoulder and whispered, "He was just scared of you being better than him." I didn't say anything. I just held her tighter. What struck me most wasn't the revenge. It was how quickly people changed their tone once the truth was undeniable. Colleagues who once averted their eyes at events now called me Ms. Donnelly, with a forced warmth. Journalists who had written about my father's brilliance were now writing about the company's new leadership, led by a woman who used to clean paint off her sleeves. But I didn't come back to be their headline. I came back to end a chapter they wrote without me. I didn't want the power. I wanted the silence to stop. And it did. Not all at once, but piece by piece. Brent stopped emailing. My mother stopped calling, though that wasn't a loss. Taylor began visiting more often, helping me go through our father's old records. I found sketches he had drawn when he was younger. One of them looked like me. Funny how the past holds evidence we never noticed while it was happening. Eventually, I used my new position not to expand the empire, but to build a new branch. One dedicated to funding small businesses led by women estranged from their families. Women like me. Women who weren't invited to the table, so they built their own. We called it Second Light. It wasn't about revenge. It was about restoration. Because when you've been erased, the most radical act isn't screaming. It's writing your name back in. Now, when I walk through the glass doors of Donnelly Group headquarters, I no longer hear the echo of my brother's laughter behind my back. I hear footsteps, mine, and they are steady, deliberate, and no longer afraid. I don't think I'll ever forget the coldness of that funeral, or the way my mother looked at me like I was a ghost. But I also won't forget the moment Wolf slid the final tape across the table, or the way my father's voice cracked when he said my name. That moment rewrote everything. They tried to write me out of my own bloodline. I rewrote the bloodline. And now I lead. Not because I was chosen, but because I endured. Justice didn't come easy. It never does. But when a long, silenced voice dares to rise, even the loudest lies begin to tremble. When injustice is met with unshakable clarity, truth becomes its own kind of reckoning. Because no matter how carefully a legacy is forged in deception, the light always finds its cracks. If you've ever had to prove your worth to the very people who should have seen it first, you're not alone. Drop a comment if this story resonated with you. Share it with someone who's finding their voice after being silenced. And if you're rewriting your own story, brick by brick, truth by truth, I'm standing with you. Thank you for watching. And remember, your value was never theirs to define.